Cheese and crackers?
Yeah. It went all out for orientation.
We're setting the bar low on
another pair of
expectations.
glasses, Brian, because you're going to have so much reading to do that your eyeballs are going to bug out.
Yeah, you're all right.
You don't have to read any of my stuff. You can just approve it.
It does make things go faster.
It comes from this stellar group.
Absolutely.
Oh, this is it.
That's where the magic happens.
Nothing to worry about.
Alakazam.
Are we ready to?
I think it's
Come to
way to
order.
go.
Okay. Planning Commission meeting for December 8th, 2014 is called to order. The first item on our agenda is continuance of SP 14-16 Site Plan and Design Review CD 14-01 Code Interpretation Similar Use and US 14-05 Geological Hazards Overlay District. The applicant submitted a request that the Planning Commission review their application to construct a new specialty retail structure for the America's Tire within the mixed-use downtown district on January 12th, 2015. And then we have a request for continuance.
And so unless the commission has questions for me, we are recommending that we continue the public hearing to the date certain of January 12th, 2015. If anyone in the present tonight, Commissioner-elect Shaw would like to testify, he certainly can, but otherwise we would recommend continuance.
Just for my own clarification, we haven't seen this item yet, have we?
This was the first evidentiary hearing tonight.
Okay.
So I think there are swarms of people here to discuss this item.
I move that we continue.
Second.
I actually have some questions. I'm sure you knew that I
Here we go,
would.
9 o'clock.
Of course. So I guess one of the things that I am always puzzled by is that this is just me personally, I hardly think of this area as part of the downtown. I mean, I know it's got that zoning, but it seems a little misplaced.
It threw me off too.
I'm assuming that the application may or may not be complete, or is it complete?
It is complete.
It is complete?
Yes.
Okay. And they are requesting a similar use determination because this use is not listed in that. I mean, I looked through the district. I didn't see anything that was said that particular.
Right. Really, what it comes down to is a similar use determination. We don't allow auto-oriented businesses in the mixed-use downtown. So the question is American Tire, which sells obviously tires for vehicles, is that an auto-oriented retail use or not? That's the at a very high level of what the discussion is about the similar use determination.
Well, you said something similar to what I was going to say because that was my recollection that uses that were auto-oriented were not really allowed. So I will be very interested in reading the staff report to find out what, or their submittal, what they're thinking that they are similar to. Because we do have a lot of non-conforming automobile-oriented uses in that zone, but they have been there, years. Many years.
And so, yeah, I mean,
It's
that's
on.
the crux of the discussion. Oop, wrong people, sorry.
Hi, Tom.
But without going into more detail, without the applicant here nor the staff report, but that is, generally speaking, what
Okay.
the discussion is about concerning the similar
Did I
use
hear you say
determination.
oil, though? I mean, if there's no oil involved, does that still make it, or is it just
I
any
didn't,
auto?
I didn't
He didn't
say
say
that.
that
No,
at
and
all.
I'd really
I
not,
thought I heard that.
I'd
I'm
prefer
sorry.
not to deliberate tonight
Okay,
without
I
the
just was
applicant
wondering.
here.
I just have one quick question. It's delineated around the Home Depot site. Is it replacing Home Depot or co-locating in that tax lot?
So right at the corner of 213 and why am I drawing a blank on the name of the new street?
Washington Street?
No, well, the old Washington
Oh,
Street.
the
Trail.
Prairie Schooner.
Prairie Schooner Way,
Yeah, which
thank
is
you.
a weird name.
Right where the Home Depot freestanding sign is, there's actually a lot on that
tax lot.
corner that was part of the original Home
Okay,
Depot
it's just-
construction.
I just wasn't sure if they were replacing or, because
No.
there was nothing here to.
New building.
Okay.
Don't take away my
Well,
Home
it's
Depot.
there if you want to go look for it.
Yeah, no, I
No,
know
I'm-
what he's talking
No,
about.
I pulled up the pre-app meeting notes and a few other things because I kept thinking, well, where is this going to go? Because it said southwest corner, and I'm thinking southwest corner of Washington and 213, and I'm thinking, there's a parking lot there.
Yeah.
Okay, so, okay, onward and upward, thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion
In a
and a
second.
second. Call the question.
Commissioner Espy? Aye. Commissioner Guile?
Aye.
Commissioner Kidwell?
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Maybe?
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff?
Aye,
Commissioner Mahoney?
We're going alphabetical now.
Yeah.
we didn't want you to feel left out.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is a work session for the Heritage Tree Ordinance.
Okay, I'll be giving you an update on this. Starting in June and going through October of this year, the Natural Resources Committee began a process of drafting amendments to the current Heritage Tree Ordinance. And this is the code by which a tree or stand of trees may be designated officially by the City Commission as a heritage tree or grove. To date, there have been 4 trees and 1 grove designation. The 4 trees that have been designated are all on private property, and the grove designation is for the Waterboard Park area. And at the direction of the City Commission, the NRC drafted these amendments, and the October draft is what is in your packet. The first set of amendments that adopted this code process was in 2008, I believe, as part of a legislative file. I just checked that, and that is the case. So it was reviewed as a Planning Commission decision and a City Commission decision. Normally, trees and public street tree ordinances are not land use decisions. They don't affect the use of land or zoning in the sense that we think of. And subsequently, the idea here is to discuss this at the Planning Commission level, get your comments and concerns, and then we would be taking this up to the City Commission for adoption through either a process of resolution or possibly a hearing, but most likely just by resolution. The basis of what these amendments include was to provide a little more structure to the process, both in terms of timeliness and also in terms of providing more clarity for the process based on the location of the tree or trees. So we have provided one section of the process which looks very much like a completeness review process from the Land Use Code, providing for a 30-day completeness review by staff, followed by 60 days to get the nomination before the City Commission. And the second, that is in the nomination process. There's also some clarification with respect to how the owner or the jurisdiction consents to the designation. So I'm going to go into those briefly. So as was the case previously, any nomination on private property must be submitted either by the property owner or with the consent of the property owner. For trees on city-owned property that is not right-of-way, that includes parks, other open spaces, and urban renewal lands that are city-controlled. The City Commission would make the final decision following a recommendation by the Natural Resources Committee. And if the nomination is for a tree in a city park, then the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee would also provide an advisory opinion to the NRC prior to going to the City Commission. Next would be city public right-of-way. such as streets and alleys. And the City Commission would make the final decision following the general procedure. And in that case, if the abutting property owner is responsible for the care and maintenance of the nominated tree, then they will be notified, and the consent of that owner is a consideration by the City Commission in the City Commission's decision. Other properties and rights of way that are not city-owned, such as ODOT or Clackamas County or any other public jurisdiction within the city, the written consent of those agencies would be required for nomination. And the submittal requirements have been specified to require a report, such as a stand health report and or a certified arborist report.
And that's at whose expense?
Expense has not been specified in this code.
Well, no, but I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a little bit of an undue burden on a private citizen unless they themselves happen to be an arborist, if they have to provide that.
Yeah, but the counter to that is, oh, I think I want to have my tree designated as a heritage tree. City, please have an arborist treat it. Oh, no, I guess I don't. And then they just got their tree fixed or inspected by an arborist.
So one of the, I'll just address that again briefly. Under the site and condition criteria that are a part of the code, there is a requirement for an arborist report that looks at the condition of the tree in terms of it, whether or not it's a hazard. But that is a requirement currently in this proposed code. Next is the review process, which I talked about, the completeness review. And then within 60 days of the application being deemed complete, it must be scheduled for a review by the Natural Resources Committee at a regularly scheduled meeting. And staff prepares a report based on the criteria in Section D. And if the Natural Resources Committee is not functioning at the time, then that report goes directly to the City Commission. The City Commission's decision has to be scheduled within 30 days of the Natural Resources Committee's decision. And then notice is provided to the general public, the nominating applicant, the property owner or abutting property owner, the chair of the neighborhood association, and PRAC if applicable. And then the City Commission will make a decision on the final nomination. The designation process has been specified in more clarity for private property. That requires a covenant running with the land that designates the tree as protected, subject to special protections. If it's on city public right-of-way, the designation would be complete upon the listing of the tree or stand of trees on official records and maps and website. And then if the right-of-way is vacated, then a protective covenant is required to be recorded for that tree. Other city properties, such as on city parks and storm ponds or any other urban renewal lands, the designation would be complete upon the City Commission approval of the nomination. And then there's some flexibility as to the form of protection. It might take the form of a restrictive covenant or other instrument or agreement applicable to the specific site. Similarly, for other public properties, either ODOT right-of-way or county right-of-way, with their consent, and the form of the legal protection would be discussed at the City Commission level and with the applicable jurisdiction. The other part of the code, and probably the most important part of the code from the Natural Resource Committee's perspective, was the criteria for designation. We worked a lot on this, and we decided that we would have two sections of criteria. The first section being the heritage criteria, and the second section being the site and condition criteria. heritage criteria have to do with the significance of the tree or stand of trees from a historical or cultural perspective, and also from an ecological perspective. So in the heritage criteria, at least 1 through 4 of those criteria must be met, and those are listed here. So the tree must have made a significant contribution to the broad pattern of Oregon City's history, or the tree or trees is associated with the life of a person or group of historic significance to Oregon City, or the tree represents a significant and distinguishable presence within Oregon City, or the tree or stand has age, size, or species significance, horticultural or ecological, which contributes to Oregon City's heritage status. Those were the heritage criteria that they decided, and at least one of those would have to be met to move the nomination forward. The site and condition criteria Roman numeral I through I guess, all required to be met, and that entails a report that the tree is not irreparably damaged, diseased, hazardous, or unsafe, or the applicant is willing to have the tree or stand of trees treated to alleviate any damage, disease, or hazard. That the tree be not listed as invasive on any regionally accepted plant list, and that the proposed tree or stand, if located on private property or on public property that is not Oregon City, that the abutting owner or owner consents to that designation and agrees to sign a protective covenant. Finally, this is the language that was in the original code, was what protections are put into place upon the nomination, and these are also included in the protective covenant, or would be included in the instrument that protects the tree. It may not be removed, topped, or otherwise altered unless permitted by this section of code. The applicant, to remove a tree, he has the burden of proof showing that, the burden imposed on the continued presence of the tree, the burden imposed on the city by the continued presence of the tree outweighs the public benefit provided by the tree. So that's a very subjective determination. But there are some aspects of this which are not considered burdens, and that includes fuel obstruction, maintenance, and infrastructure impacts or tree hazards that can be properly avoided or controlled by pruning or maintenance. Finally, the recognition of heritage tree stands is provided both through the covenant and through the furnishing of a plaque. There is some discretion here for the city to charge a fee to cover the cost of providing the plaque. To date, we have only had 4 designations, and the city has paid for the plaques for all of those. We also looked at the definitions in the code. The tree stand definition in the code, the NRC felt that that definition should state that a stand is 3 or more trees which together provide or create a mutual canopy continuous over 80 or more % of the area within the boundaries of the stand. Previously, this had been based on proximity of trunks of trees, and there was a lot of discussion about that. And finally, they settled on a canopy definition. And that was the only definition that was amended in the code. There was some discussion about how you submitted a tree, an individual tree, or 2 trees. The idea was that you would just submit 2 trees on the same form as individual heritage trees, and 3 or more you would submit as a stand. So basically, that was it. There were 9 iterations of the amendments. I've got all of them. There was a lot of work done on the process of designation, but I would love to hear any comments or concerns you have about this.
Do you have any process for removal of like, let's say, a tree gets struck by lightning, or it becomes hazardous to the point where it becomes public
Right.
hazard or something?
Of a designated tree?
Yeah.
Well, we haven't tested this yet, but the idea is that,
Not that I'd want that to happen, but
Well,
Right.
E3 does talk about
Yeah.
removing it due to poor health or hazard.
I can give you a real example. My in-laws have a very large fir tree that had, and it was literally struck by I mean, it's probably 300 or 400 feet tall. I mean, it was really tall. It was struck by lightning right in the middle, and the fire started burning down through its trunk. And it was we were able to. We know that that tree was over 200 years old, and it was a county designated heritage tree. And unfortunately, they had to cut it down because
arborists call those time bombs.
yeah, it was literally burning internally
Yeah.
from being struck by lightning.
Interesting.
And we happened to be there that day when it was hit. It was pretty weird. It's still designated, but it's not physically.
Designated stump.
Yes, it's like the one, like the at the elm. Yeah. So I have a question. Do you? What I would have loved to have seen, and I borrowed the city code here. I would have liked to have seen the clean version and the last track changes version.
Okay.
So I could figure out what was
Yeah, that was
changed.
actually
Sure.
my question is,
Because it's
yeah.
I'd like to be able to compare this to what's been changed
Okay.
compared to the original.
Well, I can certainly do that for you.
just the last, not the all 9 of them. Just
Okay.
just the very last one.
Right. Yeah, no problem. I can send that along as soon as I get a hold of it.
Initially adopted this in 2008 as part of our legislative code amendments, even though it wasn't part of.
Right.
Chapter 17 is our land use section. Chapter 16 is our subdivision section. And anything else, you don't have to go through the full legislative notification
Right.
requirement if it's in any of the other chapters. So since we adopted it through that public process, I'm thinking we'll bring this back, but it won't be your typical legislative
Right.
file. We're just going to bring it back as a staff report with requesting a recommendation to the city commission for their consideration. So we can include that final red line version and the clean version when we bring it back.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So I guess if what we're looking for tonight, if there's anything that we've told you so far that kind of jumps out or raises concerns, or you'd like more info on for when we bring it back, would be helpful.
I just-
This raises an interesting issue about expense, and I can understand if there's a really legitimate heritage tree on somebody's private property, and the city moves in and wants to declare that,
We would never declare. It wouldn't be us.
it would.
It would. This is non-regulatory. This is volunteer on private property. So to us, the expense associated with a general arborist report on the condition we believe should be borne by the applicant when it's on their property to their benefit is my personal opinion. It'd be different if I had a natural resources officer or a
No, I-
urban forestry department with a forester that I could send. I don't have those resources. I'd have to go pay someone to go do it.
So you're saying that the property owner initiates the process?
Yes.
Well, it doesn't have to be the property owner, it can be any citizen.
Yeah.
Well,
But the property owner has to consent to it.
right. So I can't come to your house and designate your tree without your consent. Right. So I
That's
mean,
final.
Right, item 2A on private property says nominations on private property shall be submitted by the property owner or accompanied by the property owner's written consent.
so where it gets more difficult is if somebody comes in and says, "I want to designate that grove of trees on that city park." Well, who pays that? That was honestly the big one we struggled with on Waterboard Park. It's like, how do you is the city going to pay for an arborist report for a 15-acre park to look at all the? I mean, we really struggled with what to do here, and we haven't remedied it here. I mean, we're not saying you have to. I mean, we're being ambiguous here, just because if we say it, the burden's on the applicant, whoever submits it. It obviously makes it more difficult for someone if they believe that a public resource should should be considered, right? Because there's no way someone's going to pay to do 15 or 20 acres. Can't afford it.
They might.
Maybe you're right. I shouldn't say never. They may, but it's highly
A
unlikely.
neighborhood association might.
Just
Could.
for context, how much would it cost for like a tree?
Pete, have you seen any?
For an arborist report?
Just an assessment.
It can range, but anywhere from $250 to $1,600, $2,000, depending.
Just for the report?
Depending upon.
Well,
It depends on the
yeah.
condition of the tree, how high they got to
Yeah,
climb. If
I
you've
mean,
got the
it's
trunk splitting,
orders
they have
of
to climb up
magnitude.
there and see if it's going to fail or not, if it's rotted.
If it's prone to disease, so you.
Right, and some of them are beautiful trees in great condition.
Yeah.
Right.
You guys have them designated on a map?
Yes, we do. It's not public yet, but it has been done by GIS, and the
It'd be
trees
nice
are on
to-
the website. But
Yeah, it'd be nice to add it to
Yeah.
OC Web Maps. So you
yeah,
can-
Does the map
We-
get
we-
approved as an exhibit or just as reference material?
Good
It's
question.
reference material.
Okay.
Good question.
Because if it's approved,
It's not a regulatory map. It's
It's just a map.
It's a map. As part of the code, I'm supposed to keep a list as well as the locations. So
just
that's
for your information.
well, it's not clear. I mean, it's a public record. If somebody asked, I mean, these things were nominated publicly. They were approved by the commission publicly. So I
Yeah.
would imagine they're a public record. It's not proprietary. There's nothing on there that's
yeah, it'll be
Social
selection of
Securities.
the maps that are on the city website. There's various maps. That would be one of them, and then there'll be a link to it in the heritage tree section of the website. So, yeah.
It'd be great to get you could imagine someday a part of a walking tour of heritage trees. I mean, it'd be pretty neat if you had
There's a state.
mass.
There's a state map.
Right, and
Yeah.
so,
Of
if we could
heritage
get a
trees.
mass of these where you could walk around to, especially if they're, I mean, that was one of the things we struggled with. Should be able to view them from the public right away, right? So you can walk along without obviously trespassing to see some beautiful specimen tree in a backyard.
Lake Oswego wrapped theirs in gold silk and put glass medallions on them a few years back.
All of them?
All of them.
How many do they have? Do you know? I mean, rounded roughly.
They've got quite a few.
Several.
Yeah.
Well, let me
More than 4?
Let me take that back. They didn't put them. We have like 30 of them. Yeah, 32. But we didn't put them on all of them. But we put on them on
A
several.
lot of them. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was quite a spectacle.
I mean, that'd be a great.
There was an AmeriCorps employee that bought
No, they were
bought
hung
the
on it,
silk
not-
and sewed it all together and wrapped it in various configurations around the tree. They got a ladder and put it up as high as possible, and then there was an etched glass medallion put on them
Pretty cool.
for photographs. It was pretty amazing. Yeah.
Sounds cool.
Well-dressed trees.
Yeah. Only in Lake Oswego.
Really, the origination of this for those of you who weren't here. I mean, it was really supposed to be, a way to celebrate heritage trees. It's voluntary. It's non-regulatory. We had some issues with one, and that kind of led to a discussion of, can we change this? What's the definition of a grove? What's the definition of a stand? How do you process it? We took a long time with the Public Works one because we just didn't know how to. We didn't expect a whole park to be nominated at once and what to do with it. To be honest, we expected 1 or 2 trees to come in at a time, and so we think we've tried to at least clarify on how things will be processed.
Does any notice go out to the D8 cat drivers in the metropolitan area? These are the last ones to know, and the first ones to knock over a tree.
Or nick them.
Really? Subdivision, you approve it and all that kind of stuff.
You mean like that big tree on South End Road that I
Yeah.
was concerned about?
Yeah, right.
It's gone, unfortunately.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Well,
No, it doesn't. We haven't typically seen one on a private property. I mean, typically they're associated with old historic homes. We haven't run into a situation where you've got a 5-acre lot and you nominate a tree in the middle and then it comes in to be subdivided. Not that wouldn't happen, so it's a good point. I mean, that's the importance of the list. Pete, they also record something against the property, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Covenant.
private property
Covenant.
would have
So
a
this-
restrictive covenant on it.
So the covenant should show up on the title report if you were to come in terms of whether it be easement, covenant, would show up and should show up on the site plan.
And, I should mention that the language of that covenant does allow for removal in the case of hazard, provided there's an arborist report that proves that.
Yeah, but just because you're subdividing it isn't a hazard, which I see in that thing, which is,
Yeah.
Right, right.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a good level
Yeah.
of protection. I'm not going to.
I would be surprised if somebody had a developable property that they would voluntarily nominate a tree. It could happen, but I would be. Like I said, I think where we're seeing this are on old properties that just have single lot and somehow the trees made it this long.
Well, I could see somebody if it was like on the edge or a corner.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, if it's the grove in the middle of the 5-acre plot.
Well, you develop around it.
Yeah.
But we, and, as part of this, we also updated the tree protection code, part of the code, which does allow smaller lot sizes,
Yeah, that's
administrative
what they do now.
variances to setbacks to protect groves.
Right.
So, we really were trying to, from the incentive side, to provide tree protection. There really wasn't an appetite to get into more of a regulatory approach to tree protection on private property.
This is a universal problem throughout the state of Oregon. Protection of trees.
Yep.
Yeah, but just following up on the email I sent earlier today to the NRC and various other people, the city of Tigard has adopted a fairly progressive code, from what I understand. And
Tualatin has too, I think.
sorry, Tualatin, yeah.
I'd
Oh,
love to see
both,
that.
yeah. And Tigard's is based on a lot of input over several years. And they are the first, maybe one of the first cities to actually use soil volume as a determinant of tree species and those sorts of things. So scientifically based, and that's always good. But yeah, that's part of a larger discussion.
So are we taking any action on this, or are we just making comments?
It was more for us to introduce it to you, get any comments, concerns, and then we'll bring it back probably in January,
Sometime in January.
I would think.
Are we
Yeah.
going down the line, Charles?
She has more comments.
No,
or questions.
I'm just asking the question.
Well, I mean, it was Paul and then,
I don't have anything else.
Yeah.
Thanks, though.
Zach?
No, just, I mean, I wouldn't say concerned, but about the passing on the burden of cost. There might be a way to play with the language to distinguish where that burden goes, but I could go either way. If anything, that's the only part that jumps out at me, but it's great.
Damon?
I have kind of a what if. I happen to have a roughly 90-year-old apple tree in my yard that is pretty close to 5 feet diameter, right at DBH, because that's where it splits. Could I designate it as a heritage tree?
it probably was a part of an older homestead, wouldn't you think?
Well, it's the original
I think
house was
you-
built in 23,
Three,
so I'm
yeah.
assuming I know it's over 75 years old because I did have an arborist look at it, but
You can propose any tree as a heritage tree.
I just
There's
didn't
this-
know if it
yeah.
fit under the other broadleaf tree species
Right.
designation or if it.
That is really a guidance chart. I mean, I think that sort of says these types of trees are eligible.
And it's clearly connected with
Yeah.
an important person because I'm a planning commissioner. So,
Absolutely. the maybe Pioneer Homestead.
yeah,
I don't know, we've seen your record.
yeah, true. So I just there was just kind of a what if. I
Yeah.
could see somebody coming, especially in some of these older neighborhoods, some of the original fruit trees and that it's
Locusts.
not an oak, but I have two 80-year-old fruit trees in my and I know other people who have small orchards. Well, it's now like 5 or 6 instead of the 15 or 20 when I was a kid. But okay.
So does that other cover something like that? Because I was making
The
it
in particular part of that clause allows for other considerations. So
because if the
yeah,
monkey tree was still living on Bud Lane's property over on Madison Street, that would definitely have been designated because it's not a species that's common to this area, but I mean it was a spectacular tree. It was pretty incredible.
great.
And they took care of it over the years, and finally, I think disease just got to it, and they had to take it down. And
Yeah, on 15th, there's a magnolia tree that's huge. I mean, it's like 35
Yeah,
feet tall.
yeah.
It's
yeah.
I think, like I said, I think the thing to remember here is that this isn't meant to be a regulatory tool that you need to make findings against that'll stand
Right.
up in court. This was really meant to
Yeah.
be
Well, I just was curious what the
holistic, and
Yeah.
you know, if someone really, really wanted it, we'd probably find a way to make it happen.
Yeah.
If someone said, you know, this tree is very important to me. I've lived here 50 years, and it's always been here. And you know,
And I'm
like I
willing
said,
to
this
pay to
isn't meant
have
to be
it-
punitive in any
Yeah,
way.
and I'm willing to pay to have it maintained if you're willing to
Right.
give me a plaque.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just can, like I said, that's the holistic
Yeah.
question of what is the bounds
I
and
think it was really just trying to kind of show what the intent is, what we're trying to accomplish, but it's certainly not exclusionary, I don't believe. I mean,
Yeah,
I mean, unless it was in such, you know, poor condition,
Yeah.
you know, there could be other factors.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I wasn't sure if it was like, okay, this is what we're thinking of, and you know, but this is what we're thinking of, but other things may fit.
Yeah, see, it would be great if there
Better
was,
to ask
was
than to-
something that even, instead of just saying other, down there, just maybe another sentence that said, other trees may be considered blah, 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 if they meet a certain.
Yeah, like is it broadleaf or is it deciduous?
Yeah,
Or see section D or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
something like that. Okay. So how do you think this ordinance dovetails with our Tree City USA designation?
Well, I think it would help. Every year when we submit our application, we provide an update of activities related to policy and planting. So if we do something beyond meeting the minimum requirements for Tree City USA every year, we tell them what it was. For example, last year we had the wider planter strips adopted with the TSP, so that counted as an additional thing. This would count as an additional policy that we've adopted to foster tree appreciation. They're very flexible at the Arbor Day Foundation as to what qualifies. So,
Doesn't hurt.
No, it doesn't. So I guess let me not start the sentence with so, because that's very bad. Let me say that, am I the only one that was a little bit disturbed by the fact that getting absolutely permission from local governments that caught my eye right away. And
What page are you on?
I'm on page 2. And the reason that caught my eye is primarily because I think that a local government who adopts an ordinance or other local governments need to be held to a higher standard since they're the implementing organizations. And I think that while this is not as proactive as I'd like to see it, I think that the jurisdictions need to be consulted, but I'm not sure I would want to see them poo-poo something because they didn't like it. And it's kind of in the same vein to me as if a public entity owns a historically significant building, this is no different having a historically significant tree, that they would be able to say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm local government X, Y, or Z, or county buzzkill, that I don't want this tree designated. I think they should be consulted, but I don't think we need to get their absolute permission unless they can show us, oh, this is going to be a right-of-way issue, or this is going to, this is going to be some other major problem.
Denise, which item are you talking about?
I'm talking about
D?
other jurisdictions under C and D, maybe
So,
B.
under 2D,
Consent
county,
of owner
state, or federal
jurisdiction.
right-of-way. Well, we discussed that.
Well, I
in
know.
some
I'm just saying.
detail.
I think it's the only.
Yeah.
It jumped out at me right
Yeah.
away.
Well, I mean, I don't see how we can impose something on
Yeah, I
a
was just gonna
jurisdiction we
say.
have no jurisdiction on.
Well,
So-
we can nominate if I wanted to go down tomorrow and nominate the county courthouse for the National Register, I don't have to get their permission to do it.
Put it on the local inventory, you
We put it on the local inventory. We didn't ask them, but that was in the
Today,
80s.
today you would
yes.
have to. So I mean, there's different levels of.
And I'm just,
I mean, I know, I get where you're coming
Yeah,
from.
I know.
I think what was frustrating. I got to be careful here.
that's okay.
This was meant to be a celebration of historic trees in the home, and it became a tool against. It became a tool used in the determination of where things should be constructed, and that was never the intent of it. So how do we balance that, I think, is what we're struggling with, right? Right now, if it's city-owned, we go through the process. You could certainly see a situation of we need to expand the ramps on 205 and there's a tree there, so it gets nominated for historic preservation or for designation. Then what do we do? And so I struggle with that, right? And maybe that is the avenue. Maybe we should have every tool available to us if we don't agree with another jurisdiction's doing and they're not considering.
Never let that stop us.
Or, is it the other side of we've exhausted all of our appeals, so we're going to nominate this thing? So that's where we struggle.
I don't want to see it used as.
But that's how it is, though.
Yeah, I want to see it used as a legitimate tool if there's something out there, because again, I'm thinking back to the Abernathy elm, and I realized that it did finally have some problems, but I think the state could have done more.
Right.
They could have. We pointed that out to them years ago that needed to be inoculated, needed to be taken care of because it was so significant, and it's got a plaque next to it now, but maybe the other elms are going to start to come up, which is, I've noticed there's some sprouts coming up, so I'm hoping that maybe we'll have a daughter or a son of that elm, because that was a fairly significant tree.
I mean, how much of let's say that the Abernathy elm was still alive today, right? I mean, should we take the initiative to convince them of the significance and why it should be protected, rather than just say, "Oh, you're not listening"? I mean, so
No, I think that's the way to go. I want to see it be more proactive in terms of, if we are aware as citizens and as a jurisdiction that there are some significant specimens, then we ought to take the initiative to make sure that those things are called out or that they are recognized, rather than hoping and waiting for somebody, or maybe you put a bug in somebody's ear and say, "Hey, Damon, I know about this tree. Why don't you nominate it to the."
I
So
agree with what Denise
So
is
there
saying.
needs to be some sort of a balance. I mean, I think again, this is only to our benefit. I believe.
Well, I think if you go back to the very first paragraph in this section, that
The preamble.
item B1 under general procedure, any citizen can nominate a tree. So, that's the initiation of the process. When it comes to whether or not that tree goes beyond the nomination process and gets accepted, then I think it's presumptuous for us to say that we can force, whether it's a private property owner or any government agency.
I'm only talking
to
about
do
the
that.
government.
Well, I'm just saying, I
Yeah.
think it's equally presumptuous to say that we can force another government agency to do that. Now, we have some opportunity to testify by going to them and saying, here's our justification for why we think that should be done, and try to convince them. But I don't think there's any leverage that we can take to force them to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, at least not at this point. Before you go on, I noticed something that kind of is a typo on 2B.
Or not to be.
The last paragraph says, if the nomination is for a city park, not if the nomination is within a city park. Because,
There's a
Yeah.
few little typos.
but I mean, that one's like, PrAC doesn't get to talk about it unless you do the whole park, as opposed to there's just one
I'm not
tree.
aware of any parks that are
Okay.
totally
Yeah.
full of trees, but
That's a good one.
Well, but I mean, it's just the way it's written.
But I agree with what Charles was saying. I mean, from a process standpoint, if it can go to the Natural Resources Committee, who sees that this is, an ODOT property, they should determine the next steps on how to approach ODOT or something.
Well, can it even get there if they say no, no?
There's a section, it's not really, the timing of that consent by that jurisdiction is not really specified in here. What is specified is some sort of instrument needs
Okay.
to be approved by the city commission.
Okay,
So
well
at some
then,
point, the city commission might say, we approve this nomination pending consent of, which then
They
gives
could.
you more impetus when you go to that jurisdiction to say, look, the city council has
Ideally, you
weighed
would
in
get
on
that
this."
hammered out as early in the
Oh,
process
sure,
as possible.
but
yeah.
Yeah, the city council will invariably ask staff, have you gotten consent from that local jurisdiction to do this designation? And you'll get that bulgy-eyed analysis.
Well, and I think
So much.
realistically, if we were to let's say hypothetically, we found a tree on an ODOT piece of property that we thought was a legitimate heritage tree, you can make an appeal through our state representative or somebody.
Yeah, I just go talk to Matt Garrett and say, I think
Well,
this should be
Lots of
designated.
avenues.
I mean, there
Yeah.
there are ways of approaching that we can find an advocate that has the authority to take some initiative on that.
Anybody could get it done.
Yeah, I
Well, I'm
don't,
just saying, I just wanted to bring it up to see if I was the only one that noticed that. And then my question on page 7 is that, now maybe this is being, now I did read this late at night, 1704, you have 1360, you have a definition. I was not aware that trees could be communicable or have a communicable disease that somebody could get. Is that something?
Or insects.
Well, I know they have insects, but I didn't know if I touched a tree and it had a disease, could I get that disease? And that's kind of what that meant to me.
You know what?
You'll be growing pine needles.
No, fungus.
well, it says, if you're talking about
Similar to the
Harboring a
similar to the
communicable
elms at
disease.
Carnegie and the issue that they had.
There's some stigma associated.
Well,
with it.
there's I know trees can transmit disease to each other.
Yeah, no, I read that completely as within, because it says, and cause the decline of adjacent nearby trees, and so,
Yeah, well,
Yes.
like I said, I read it and it just struck me as odd.
That's 2 other trees,
You need better lighting at night.
SIC.
Oh, I had plenty of light, believe me. I had caffeine. I was buzzing through this.
any other?
Theoretically, you could have a tree that's diseased that you don't see like what we see at Carnegie, where it's transferred from tree to tree.
Right.
Right. Could just be raw.
So
Touch
there may
elm
be,
disease,
I guess I'm not the arborist person,
fungus.
transferable, what's the right word?
Transmogrification,
What's the
yes.
right word for a disease that hops from tree to tree?
communicable.
Communicable sounds right? Yeah.
Tom?
I don't need to add anything more to what's already been said.
So we won't put this on as a solo item. We'll put it on when we have something else, and when I have a planning commission. That's why I'm thinking it's going to be that one in January. I'm not aware of anything off the top of my head for the December meeting.
And then we'll have our track changes.
Yep, we'll have track changes and then a clean version.
In a whole new board.
Who knows?
Yeah. So, yeah, I really appreciate all the work that you guys have done, and please, when you see the NRC, let them know that
Oh, yeah.
it's,
I will. Yeah,
it's
they
one of
work
those
hard on
things
this.
that it's a pain in the butt to hammer out, and as you said, 9 different, sets of changes, 10, because I found that one typo. But it just, I know what it's like to try to write any sort of policy ordinance, and so thank you for all the work.
Devil's in the detail.
I will. Thanks.
Okay, so, Tony, we have any communications?
I just wanted to give you an update on the Willamette Falls Legacy Project.
Yeah, I was gonna ask
As
about
many of
that.
you are aware, the City Commission approved the Framework Master Plan, the multimodal mixed-use area designation, the comp plan amendment, the zone change, the implementing zoning for Blue Heron property. As I've been updating you recently, many of you recall that we had a $5 million appropriation from the governor's office, and our submittal was due to them March 31st of 2015. That date got bumped up to December 15th of 14, so in about a week. So we were made aware of that about a month and a half ago, so we've been working to meet that deadline. And really, as part of the appropriation, there are three main things that have to happen. The governor's office needs to sign off on a financial package for how the Riverwalk or the improvements would be paid for and constructed before they'll release any of their funds. A local public agency needs to have a property interest, whether that be actual property or easement, in the public access component along the Willamette River. And the state parks needs to be asked to be involved in the planning, interpretation, and potentially operation of any public investment on that property. So for the first one, we've prepared a financial package that we're going to submit to the governor's office. And as many of you recall, we talked about $4 million for the design and engineering of the Riverwalk, and then another $30 to $35 million for the construction of the Riverwalk itself. We're prepared to release an RFP for what we're calling 10% drawings. So essentially looking at where the route should be. Is it feasible? Are there any fatal flaws? And we've put together, we've identified 1.7, I think off the top of my head, sorry, it's a little bit late, 1.7 million for that initial design and engineering. And then we're proposing to construct what we call phase one, which we believe would be on the PG dam component potentially of about $10 million. So we've identified those funds. So that includes the $5 million from the state plus additional funds from Metro local agencies and some grants that we hope to be successful on to complete that funding package. We're currently negotiating with Portland General Electric on an easement across their facility, so across the dam and out to the dance floor, as well as Mr. Heigirken. We're very close to an agreement with Portland General Electric. We hope to have that later this week. And then we have a letter of intent, or a term sheet signed by Mr. Heigirken outlining the terms of the easement. So we're in the process of writing up that legal agreement and hopefully have that signed by him in the near future as well. And we have entered into a memorandum of understanding with all of our partners. So Clackamas County, for example, has federal lobbyists in Washington, D.C. that we're able to utilize for this project to identify funding at the federal level. And we're also able to use their lobbyists at the state level. We also are able to use Metro's lobbyists to assist there. Metro's agreed to take on the lead for the design and engineering of the Riverwalk. So we just finished the planning process, and Oregon City was the face of that. We were the ones who entered into the contract. We were the liaison between the consultant team so that they had one person to talk to. But really behind that, we meet at least once a week with our partners, and that includes every one of the agencies and their representatives. And we work as a team and a partnership in decision making and how that. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, even though we speak as one person, one voice out in front. So that same model is being utilized for the Riverwalk design and engineering, where Metro is going to take the lead, but my staff is actually on as a representative for the decision making process that goes into how that contract's managed, what the scope of work is, decisions that are made, whether it be route or whatever decisions are going to come up when we go through this process. So while we may not be the name at the very front, we are continuing to work under a very successful model that we've used really since day one in terms of decision making as a partnership, where everybody has a fair share and a fair stake and a fair say at the table on how decisions are made. So we hope to show the state that we have those agreements. And then, I'm sorry, I was talking about the memorandum of understanding. We've taken on, as Oregon City, the operation and maintenance once the facility is constructed on the long term. And then we have asked the state, and they did sign on to be a partner in the liaison between the partnership and the Native American tribes of the state, to include them in the discussions that are happening and in the cultural interpretation that happens on that site, as well as assisting us in terms of the large-scale engineering and just design of a public amenity of that size. So we believe we've met the three criteria that are necessary for the sale of those bonds, those $5 million. We're actually heading down. We'll be in front of the House Ways and Means tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, giving them an update on where we're at in the process and potentially starting to look for additional funds for the additional phases. We don't think we're going to have $35 million at the time of construction, so we probably would have to phase this out unless something changes. Not that we're going to continue to try to find those funds, which include state level, federal level, philanthropic grants. We're looking at all of those opportunities, and we'll continue to. It'll be an ongoing effort, so that those timelines will change, and we are hoping to release the RFP within the next 30 days. For the design and engineering of the Riverwalk, and then have a targeted construction date of spring, summer of 2016 for phase 1. So a lot going on there. We also have a friends group that we're trying to initiate. Metro and Oregon City each put in seed money, essentially to create a friends group that we would hope would be able to stand on its own, be able to accept donations as a 501c3, lend support when needed, to letter write, campaign, whatever we're going to need as we move forward, lobby, moving forward.
They had a tour,
Mhm.
and that's the last notification we've had.
Yep. So.
Are you going to mention the ASLA award?
Yeah, we were awarded. No, you got me though. I'm drawing a blank on what it was called. The Merit Award. So it wasn't the highest, but we were awarded for the planning effort that went into creating the Willamette Falls Legacy Project Framework Plan. They appreciated the public involvement process, as well as the significance and opportunity that providing public access and habitat restoration along the Willamette and to the falls means to the state of Oregon. So we were very proud to receive that. American Society of Landscape Architects. So hopefully more to come in the future.
Good.
That is the big one right at the moment. America's Tire, you'll be seeing. Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan. Many of you may recall, City Commission approved that. It was appealed to LUBA. LUBA remanded it because it wasn't consistent with the Metro 2040 map. We amended the Metro 2040 map to be consistent with the adopted concept plan. That amendment to the 2040 map was included in the urban growth boundary decision. The urban growth boundary decision was adopted and approved by Metro. That was based on the urban and rural reserves decision. Both of those were appealed to the Court of Appeals, but ours was put on hold while they waited for a decision on urban and rural reserves. The legislature came in and did their big fix, their big grand bargain. So essentially where we got to was the Court of Appeals found no issue with the approval of the 2040 map amendment. It was not appealed to the Supreme Court. Therefore, the map amendment is in place. So when the first appeal happened at LUBA, the City Commission determined that once all of the appeals are addressed, that Beaver Creek Road concept plan will be brought back to the Planning Commission for public hearing and adoption again. So probably in the next couple months, we'll be providing some additional findings. The City Commission remanded it back to the Planning Commission with limited review, essentially looking at infrastructure, public amenity, public facilities. I'm drawing up. It's been a little while. Police and fire. And so we're going to provide some additional findings that we believe help support the case, and then go through the adoption process again. Once we get the concept plan adopted and all the appeals are exhausted, we do need to come back and write the implementing ordinance. We created a couple new zones out there. There are design standards that need to be in place that don't exist today. So it's just hard to budget and put a timeline on it, knowing, I think what have we had, about 7 years of appeals to deal with Beaver Creek Road concept plan. So it is something that has to happen. It's just a matter of when do we expend the funds and the staff time to do it. And
Later.
my position is once the concept plan's adopted and appeals are exhausted before I spend resources on writing a code that may or may not be implemented.
You had a little bigger
That's
fires,
smart.
a little closer to home to deal with first.
I
so
do,
Yeah, we
yeah.
had
There's
Willamette
smoke
Falls,
out there, but
Yeah.
which is a good fire, not a bad fire.
Yeah, sign code, obviously the commission recommended approval to the city commission on the sign code we weren't going to be able to get a work session in plus the public hearings under the current commission, so we decided to wait and went to the new commission, was seated, update them. So their first hearing in February is when we continued it to. We're going to ask them for a continuance that night, and then I'm going to get it on the February work session so that we can walk them through everything. And then hopefully they'll continue with their adoption process in March and April for the sign code. As you're well aware, the big thing there is implementation. We're working on an implementation plan right now. You could realistically see one taking up significant amount of time of one of my 4 planners to try to get that implemented, dealing with code enforcement, education, noticing.
well, and it's good that it's in the February work session you're talking about it, because that lets them do input prior to budgeting. So
Yeah.
because that's clearly where they're going to have to put up or shut up.
Right. And then the other one, so the last time we did major code amendments was 2008 when we adopted this heritage code. After we do code amendments, obviously, it's always a for certain that on the next day when it goes into place, we find the typo or cross-reference that
sure.
did not happen. So we have about 6 years of code cleanup that we've identified. So I'm hoping to bring that forward as well as we enter into the next fiscal year. We need to get a couple of these things under our belt. I don't want to have too many things in the fire at once. I've kind of felt like we went that way for the last year and a half and kind of ran my guys ragged here. So we'll try to pace ourselves a little bit. But that would be something that we'd be looking at. Not wholesale rewrites. It's trying to clean up some things, some discrepancies we found, clarifications, cross-referencing, typical cleanup type fashion.
Continual process.
Isn't there an app? Code
An app
cleanup?
An app for that? We should make one with all the time we spend on these things.
Clear
Code
across
cleanup
USA.
app.
Next week, yeah.
Deletes everything.
I think
Yeah, I
those
wanna
were
do
the
that.
major
Look at that time.
I wanted to ask a
updates that we're working on right now.
couple of things that we had in the past that have moved on.
Uh-huh.
So what is the status of the assisted living retirement memory care facility that was approved that's on South End Road?
Currently, the engineering department is still reviewing the civil plans. The building official issued a foundation-only plan, and no other permits are going to be released until several things have to happen. Since it's a state licensed facility, the state building official has to approve the building plans and any revisions that come out of that. The building official has to receive a full set of building plans that meet his requirements. That hasn't happened yet. And the civil plans need to be final signed off by Public Works, estimates of public improvements and other things. So there's a ways to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were there any circumstances with regard to the premature second round of tree removals that happened that wasn't supposed to happen, as I understand?
Well, nothing since the hearings. No. The 4 trees that were designated on the plan for protection have been fenced off. The other trees have been removed. And the final mitigation plan has yet to be submitted. But the condition of approval is written in such a way that there will be the full amount of mitigation trees required for those trees that were removed.
I've got one quick question
Yeah.
about an oak tree that's on the north property line that is kind of right on the fence line.
Right.
It's sitting there as a snag, and God forbid they leave it there, but if they do you guys have any kind of ability to get them to remove that? And because it looks really bad there.
Right.
So,
If it's a hazard, we could probably ask them to look at it. Yeah.
So did they receive any punitive? Were they fined in any way for the premature removal the second time, or the first time?
No, the way our code is written,
I mean, I know they got a stop work
they
order, but that
have
obviously
the
didn't mean anything.
stop work orders, and they have to do the mitigation plan revision. So that's kind of the way our code is. And if you're submitting plans that meet our code, then we don't impose fines. We did not impose any kind of violation fines in that case.
So
we
they made
didn't
a
take
good-
them to municipal
they
court.
made a good faith effort to remediate as soon as they were aware of the problem, and so there wasn't really a reason to wind it through the courts.
Right.
Which probably, the judge probably would have said,
Yeah.
what's
Go
the problem
back
here?
around to
Yeah.
planning.
I think this is one of the things we really struggle with the tree code is that
People are bad.
the decision was made that we don't want to regulate trees on private property. But we want to regulate trees during development. And so you're kind of stuck in this, limbo of, you shall try to protect the trees to the maximum extent practicable. It is the worst sentence in the world when as a regulator,
Yeah, it is.
right?
I'm sure there's one that's worse, but that's pretty bad.
But I'd rather it say if it's outside of the construction zone and in the setbacks, it shall be protected. I mean,
Aspirational, Tony.
it is. It's not regulatory. And so we struggle when folks say, "Why are they cutting those trees?" And it's like, "And why aren't you fining them?" It's because by our code, as long as they mitigate, they can. If they put trees back or they pay to the tree fund, they can cut the tree. So I think there's this perception that all trees are protected, and it's not the case, and we struggle with that quite a bit.
See, I don't think we should be letting people off so easily with mitigation, and that's what really kind of bothers me.
Well, and
I mean, I understand.
then we
in
need to
terms
then
of
we need to say
a
you
larger-
shall not move the tree.
Well, I think when they're in the pre-app, you tell them you cannot remove anything from this property until you have authorized approvals from the city, period. And if you do that, see, people do that and then think they're asking for forgiveness later. And that's just, to me, that just sends the wrong message because they know nothing's going to happen to them. So,
well, your point is well taken, but what we struggle with is how much energy do we spend when your code actually allows that?
well, I'm
Well,
saying
and that is problematic. If you have a code that doesn't say it's prohibited, it's hard.
Kind
to-
of like bluffing with a 2 and a
right,
4.
exactly. We're trying to hit them with a nail instead of a hammer. I'm
Many,
not-
many years ago, I was involved in a project. It was a large apartment project, and I wasn't involved in the trees at all. I was just working on the architecture of the buildings. And one day I heard that the property owner and one of his guys had cut down a bunch of trees that were like kind of on the edge of the hillside, and they got arrested by the city of Portland.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because probably the hillside was going to come down.
I don't know the circumstances, but when I found out the property owner and one of his guys got arrested for cutting down trees, I thought, wow.
My attention. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm not trying to make this a criticism. I'm just trying to understand in my mind. Again, we have large trees or larger than 2-inch diameter trees, and somebody can come in and cut them all down, and then we get these trees. And somehow that just doesn't seem right. It's not 1 for 1 or 2 for 2, because they take a long time to grow. I mean, believe me, it pained me to remove the tree that was on my property. If it hadn't been crushing my garage, I probably would have left it there, but I had nowhere to move it. Come to find out, after we cut it down, the middle portion of the tree was rotted. I mean, you couldn't tell from the outside, but once they cut it down and they opened it up here, I could put my hand in the center of it and pull out pieces of the tree. And I thought, oh my God, how long would that have been before it went all the way and then, fell on my house or something? But
Could have moved your garage.
Well,
Denise?
we tried. So, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how we can, I'm not interested in us going around and beating everybody to death with a hammer, but,
Chainsaw.
or a chainsaw. It's like other things. The word is out. People know they can do X, Y, and Z, and they can get, in my opinion, get away with it. And so,
the
I don't know
irony
about
is-
that. I mean,
Well-
this doesn't happen very often.
Okay,
where people-
well, let me-
These guys,
I'm not talking about South End Road people. I'm just
Well-
saying in general, in subdivisions, we have people come in and they say, "Oh, look at all the trees and blah blah blah." And I said, "Yeah, but fine."
Like
It's
the guy behind Pizza Hut at Clear Cut.
well, yeah.
And then the
can.
other park places.
You are
would be-
perfectly
I
allowed.
understand. I'm saying he can't. But I'm just saying that that's the sort of stuff that people get all up in arms about because the code, lets
It's
that
whatever
and it's
perception
like-
it is.
And so, we gotta give you.
it's not the
ability-
code. It was a decision by the elected officials that we're not going to regulate trees on private property. This isn't a code not being applied or us turning
No,
our
no.
head.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm with you. I'm with you, Damon.
And let's just say you take out a 19-inch tree, you got to put back 9 2-inchers, and what we're actually running up against is we're
Where do
getting
you put them?
Well, yeah, so we're getting it from both sides, right? We're not regulating enough trees, and we're letting these trees come down. And then when they do mitigate for them, they're going, how am I supposed to put back 130 trees? Where am I putting these? So we're in the middle trying to say, okay, well, we're trying to find spots throughout the city for these to be planted in, or you put money in the bank. And so it is a hard one on some of these lots.
So how does the money in the bank get allocated?
It hasn't been yet. We've just been accumulating it because up until recently, we've been able to find spots to plant them. Folks would much rather plant
I'll
them.
come see you because I know some spots we could put some trees in.
$100,000.
Tony, what about a bond? Like you do in a subdivision, a performance bond. On a site development, you just say, okay, this is what we're gonna do, okay? Put up or shut up, and we're gonna,
We accept. So you're building a subdivision, and you want to go before you can plat the lot. So essentially, before the lots become legal and you can sell them, you either have to have all your public improvements in, including tree mitigation, or you post surety.
Surety. Right.
So we essentially take some type of a surety at I think about 115 of the cost, and let's say there's a second lift of asphalt, 15 street trees, and 30 mitigation trees. We add it all up. They write us a check, goes into surety. They can go record. So we do it on the front end in terms of whatever public improvement or mitigation hasn't been provided, we get money before we'll let them record the plat, which is really, you've got the hammer of recording the plat and you got the hammer of the C of O on the house. Those are kind of your two checks along the way. So we do collect on those. And then as those are put in, we reimburse.
I think that the biggest point that Denise makes, and it's the point where I think it's the hardest part to grapple with. I don't think anybody has a problem with small, insignificant trees being taken down. And we just finished talking about heritage trees. It's that tree that's 100 feet tall that's been there for 50 or 60 years that you say, what makes a tree become a heritage tree? It's
Well-
because it's old. And if people keep cutting trees down when they're teenage trees, they never get old.
Exactly.
Well, and
Good
the other
point.
thing that I think is a reason why we don't necessarily want to regulate is the people who go, they cut down all the trees across the street from me where I used to play. You used to play in somebody else's private property, and that's, or they cut down the giant maple that shaded my house. So I didn't have to put in air conditioning, and now I do. Well, too bad. I mean, that's,
It's a hard one as
It's a
we
hard
try
one.
to get density and these new homes or new construction in, and
But we need trees.
how do you balance it? And well, yeah, it's are there better spots to put it? And you're right, it takes a heck of a long time to
And-
replace that canopy.
And I think that may be one thing you want to do with that tree money is not look at where you can put 122-inch trees, but where can you put 6, 12-inch trees? And, I mean, I think just replacing the canopy around the library, granted, there's going to be construction now, but putting significantly more mature trees in takes care of both problems.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I agree, because,
Yeah.
the reality is, when you cut down a large tree and you replace it with a bunch of little trees, it's gonna take a long time for those little trees to be anything resembling that big
Not
tree.
not in any of our lifetimes.
I think working with Pete and Parks and Public Works, I think all of those are things that we try to do. We have bought larger
I can't see that.
diameter trees, like the one we put in front of Carnegie. We've put some other larger specimen trees throughout the city. But then also, like along riparian areas, is where we go in and we mass plant. And so it's all of those actually are the
Sure.
answer.
We need
And-
beaver-proof trees, though, down by the,
Yes.
put hot sauce on them or something.
That's
They don't
right.
like that.
Yeah.
What else, Tony?
I think that's all that I've got right now.
Okay.
Move to adjourn?
No,
Let's
this is
adjourn.
not the world's record. The world's record is 8:15.
Thank you.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Well, I thought we were going to be at 8.